Someone broke into a royal palace, not to steal anything, not to hurt anyone, just to see three sleeping children, and they had a key, a very old key, a key given to them by a princess who died almost 30 years ago. The security cameras went dark, the guards did not respond, and inside the nursery, someone was already sitting, calm, still, quiet, watching the royal children sleep. Who was this person? How did they get inside? And what did they want? The answer will shock you because this is not just a story about a break in, this is a story about a promise, a love that refused to die, and a secret that waited 28 years to be told. Stay with us, this story will stay with you. This is a true story. It happened on a cold night in November. The city of London was dark. The streets were wet and empty. Most people were sleeping. Inside Kingston Palace, the night shift had just started. The guards were at their posts. The cameras were running. The children were sleeping safely. Everything looked perfectly normal. But deep inside the palace, something was already wrong. One guard would soon discover it, and nothing after that night would ever be the same. If this story moves you, please like this video, share it with someone, and please subscribe for more stories like this.
It was past midnight when the alarm didn't go off. That was the first strange thing at Kensington Palace. Alarms always went off. Every door sensor, every motion detector, every camera feed, all connected to a central security system that had never once failed in over a decade. Night shift guards trusted it the way most people trusted their own heartbeat. But that night, something was different. The nursery wing camera, the one covering the corridor outside the children's rooms, had gone dark. Not black, like a power cut, just still. Frozen, the time stamp in the corner of the monitor had stopped blinking. Daniel leaned closer to the screen. His breath fogged slightly in the cold of the security room. He pressed two fingers to his earpiece and quietly called it in. No. Response from his partner. He tried again. Static. Daniel stood up slowly. He reached for the radio on his belt, checked his sidearm out of protocol, and stepped out into the corridor. His boots made no sound on the marble floor. Years of training had made him quiet without thinking about it. The palace at night had a particular kind of beauty. Gold-framed portraits half-lit by wall sconces. Thick curtains drawn across tall windows. The faint smell of fresh flowers replaced every morning by staff. But right now, Daniel noticed none of that. He was focused entirely on the corridor ahead. The nursery wing was at the far end of the residential floor, past to security checkpoints that should each have had a guard. As he rounded the first corner, he found the checkpoint empty. A half-drunk cup of tea sat on the small desk, still steaming. Whoever had been standing there had left only moments ago or had been moved. Daniel's jaw tightened. He moved forward slowly, scanning each doorway. The second checkpoint was empty too. His heart was beating faster now, though his face showed nothing. He had been trained for moments exactly like this. Stay calm, think before reacting. Protect first, and ask questions after the door to the nursery corridor was slightly open. It should have been sealed shut. He placed one hand flat on the wood and pushed it gently. The hinges made the softest whisper of a sound. He stepped inside. The corridor was dim, only small nightlights near the floor, casting a pale blue glow across the carpet. 3 doors led off this hallway. The first was a sitting room for the nannies. The second, a small bathroom. The third at the very end was the nursery itself, where Prince George, Princess Charlotte, and Prince Louis slept. And that door was open too. Not wide open, just enough. enough that a thin strip of warm light spilled out into the corridor. The kind of light that comes from a small lamp being on inside a room that was supposed to be dark. Daniel. Marsh had faced threatening situations before. He had trained for the worst. But something about that thin strip of light, warm, golden, almost gentle, made the hair on the back of his neck rise in a way that pure danger never had, because it didn't look like a break dash in. It looked like someone was already inside and had been there long enough to make themselves comfortable. He reached for his radio one more time. Still nothing, so he did the only thing left to do. He walked toward the light. Daniel pushed the nursery door, open with the tips of his fingers. The room was warm. That was the first thing he felt, warmth, and the faint smell of lavender from the oil diffuser the nannies kept running through the night. A small lamp burned softly in the corner, casting everything in amber light. He swept the room in a single trained glance. 3 beds, 3 small shapes beneath soft blankets, all still, all breathing. The children were safe, but in the chair beside the window, the old wooden rocking chair that the nanny used during late-night feedings years ago sat someone who should not have been there. A woman, she looked to be in her late 60s, perhaps older. She was slight in frame, with silver hair pinned loosely at the back of her head. She wore a plain gray cardigan and dark trousers, nothing fine, nothing royal. She sat with her hands folded in her lap, perfectly still, watching the sleeping children with an expression that wasn't threatening or frantic or broken. It was peaceful. That was what unsettled Daniel most of all. She didn't flinch when he entered. She didn't run or cry out or reach for anything. She simply turned her head slowly toward him, looked at him with calm, tired eyes, and placed one finger gently to her lips, as if to say, "Please don't wake them." Daniel's hand was already on his radio. His body was coiled and ready. But something in her stillness made him hesitate for just a moment, not because he wasn't trained, not because he doubted the protocol, but because in all his years of protecting this family, he had never once encountered something like this, a threat that looked so entirely like grief. "Ma'am," he said quietly, keeping his voice low for the sake of the sleeping children, "I need you to stand up slowly and come with me." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked back at the children. "I just wanted to see them," she said. Her voice was soft, English, but with something faint underneath, a slight roughness that came with age and, perhaps, with years of crying. "I didn't touch anything. I didn't wake them. I only wanted to see them. Ma'am, she would have wanted me to know them." Her voice barely cracked. She caught it. She would have. Daniel didn't move. He didn't lower his guard. But inside, something shifted. Not sympathy, not yet, but recognition. The shape of a story he didn't yet understand by now. 2 other guards had appeared silently in the doorway behind him, his backup, responding to the silent alert he had triggered when he entered the corridor. He gave them a short hand signal. "Stand by. Don't escalate." The woman rose from the chair without being asked again. She moved slowly, carefully, with the stiffness of someone whose knees ached in the cold. She took one last look at the 3 sleeping children, lingering just a second longer on the smallest shape, the youngest, Louis, and then she turned and walked toward the door. She didn't resist. She didn't speak again. They brought her downstairs to one of the side rooms used for private staff meetings, not a cell. Not a formal space, just a quiet room with a table and chairs and a window that looked out over the dark garden. A guard stood at the door. Another was already pulling the security footage, trying to understand how she had gotten in at all. That was the question that would keep them up for hours. Because Kensington Palace was not a building you simply walked into. It had layers of security that most government buildings couldn't match. Multiple perimeter checkpoints, biometric locks on the residential floors, cameras that covered every corridor, every stairwell, every entrance, and yet she was here, in the nursery, in the chair, watching. 3 royal children sleep as if it was something she had every right to do. The duty commander made the call no one wanted to make at 2 in the morning. He rang Prince William. The phone rang 4 times before a groggy, alert voice answered because William, like all parents, was a light sleeper when his children were nearby. "Sir," the commander said carefully, "there's been an incident. The children are safe, but we need you to come down." There was a pause on the line. "I'm already on my way," William said, and somewhere in the palace above them, footsteps moved quickly across a cold floor toward the stairs.
William came downstairs. He heard what happened. Then he did something surprising. He asked to speak to the woman alone. No guards, no liars, just him. He sat across from her. He looked at her carefully and she spoke first. She said, "I worked for your mother." The room went silent. She was not a criminal. She was not dangerous. She was someone who had carried a secret for almost 30 years. And tonight, she finally told it.
William arrived in under 3 minutes. He had pulled on a dark sweater and trousers over his pajamas. His hair was uncombed, his eyes sharp and awake in the way that only fear can make a person. He went to the nursery first. That was where any father would go. He stood in the doorway and watched his children sleep for a long moment, his hand resting on the doorframe, his chest rising and falling slowly. George, Charlotte, Louis, all 3, undisturbed, safe, still dreaming. He exhaled. Then he turned and followed the commander downstairs to the private meeting room. He was told briefly what had happened. A woman, elderly, found inside the nursery. No apparent weapon, no signs of forced entry that they could yet identify. She had given them no name and offered no explanation beyond those few quiet words. "Upstairs, I just wanted to see them." William listened without interrupting. His expression was controlled, the kind of stillness that comes from years of learning to manage emotion in public. But his jaw was tight, and when the commander finished, there was a pause that lasted several seconds. "She said she would have wanted me to know them," he repeated quietly. Those were her exact words. "Yes, sir," confirmed by Officer Marsh. William stood for a moment longer. Then he said something that surprised everyone in the room. "I want to speak to her. Alone." The room went quiet. "Sir, with respect, that's not alone," he repeated, not unkindly, but firmly. The commander looked at him for a moment, then gave a small nod. Protocol could be bent for a prince. Especially this one, in this particular palace, under this particular roof. A single guard remained visible outside the glass panel of the door, but the room was cleared. William walked in. The woman was sitting at the table with a cup of tea in front of her that she hadn't touched. She looked up when he entered, and then, slowly, she began to rise out of instinct. Out of old habit, the way people of her generation always stood when royalty entered a room. "Please," William said, pulling out the chair across from her. "Don't." He sat down. He looked at her carefully, taking in her face the way he would a painting he was trying to read. She met his eyes without flinching, without collapsing into apology or panic. There was something in her steadiness that he found unusual. Most people who ended up in rooms like this with people like him could not hold still. She could. "I owe you an explanation," she said. Before he could speak, "I'd like one," he agreed. She wrapped both hands around the teacup she hadn't drunk from, as if drawing warmth from it. Outside, the garden was black and still. Rain had begun to tap softly against the window. "My name is Margaret Hadley," she said. I worked for your mother. The room seemed to shrink slightly around those words. William didn't move. I was a private secretary. Not in the official sense. I was never listed publicly. Your mother found me useful for things that needed to be handled quietly. Personal correspondence. Appointments she didn't want documented. I worked for her for almost 11 years. She paused. She was choosing her words with the careful precision of someone who had spent a lifetime knowing how much words could cost. When she died, I made a promise to her. It wasn't spoken. She didn't know she was going to die. But I made it to her in my own way. That one day, when the children existed, when her grandchildren existed, I would find a way to see them, not to disturb them, not to approach them, just to see them, to witness them and carry that back to the version of her that I keep alive in here. She touched her chest just once and then dropped her hand. I know how that sounds. Liam was very still. The rain tapped at the window. How did you get inside? He asked. She hesitated for just a moment. And in that hesitation lived an entire story that had yet to be told. That, she said slowly, is the part that is going to be difficult to explain. Margaret Hadley reached into the pocket of her cardigan and placed something on the table between them. It was a key, old, brass worn smooth at the edges from years of handling. It looked like the kind of key that belonged to another era, heavy and deliberate. Made at a time when things were built to last rather than to be replaced. William stared at it. This was given to me by your mother, Margaret said. In 1995, she told me it opened a side entrance to the palace, one that had been used for discreet comings and goings. For decades, staff corridors, private access. The kind of door that doesn't appear on official building plans. She folded her hands on the table. She never asked for it back. I kept it because returning it felt like letting go of her. And tonight I used it because I had run out of time. Run out of time, William repeated. Margaret nodded slowly. I have been diagnosed with a condition that is progressing faster than the doctors expected. I have perhaps a few months. Maybe less. She said it without self-pity, without performance, the way very old people sometimes speak about death, as if it is simply the next appointment in a long calendar. I have carried this promise for 28 years. I did not want to die without keeping it. The room held its silence for a long moment. Outside the door, Daniel Marsh stood at his post, watching the two figures through the glass. The prince leaning slightly forward now, his elbows on the table, his hands loosely clasped. The woman across from him, straight-backed and still. It didn't look like an interrogation anymore. It looked like something else entirely. William picked up the key. He turned it over in his fingers slowly, feeling the weight of it. It was real. Old brass didn't lie. And something about the shape of it, the specific age of it, confirmed something in him that he hadn't expected to feel recognition, or the edge of it. A ghost of familiarity, the way you sometimes recognize a stranger's voice without knowing why. She never mentioned you, he said. It was not an accusation, just the truth. She wasn't supposed to, Margaret replied. That was the arrangement. There are people who exist in a life to hold things, documents, secrets, tasks, feelings that the person cannot hold publicly. I was one of those people for your mother. I am not looking for credit. I never was. She looked down at her untouched tea, then back at him. But I want you to know something. Not because I need you to believe me or because I want anything from you, but because it is true and because she cannot say it herself. She paused. The rain outside grew slightly louder. Your mother talked about you every single day. Not about the public William, not the prince, not the duty. She talked about you the way every mother talks about her son when no one is listening. She worried about whether you were sleeping enough, whether you were happy inside the life that had been chosen for you before you could choose anything yourself. She used to say that you carried things quietly, and that it was both your greatest strength and the thing that frightened her most. William's expression didn't break, but something behind his eyes moved, shifted like a change in the depth of still water. She would have loved them, Margaret continued, glancing upward slightly as if gesturing toward the nursery 3 floors above. George and Charlotte and Louis. She would have sat on the floor with them and broken every rule of royal conduct and not cared even slightly. A faint, genuine smile crossed her face for just a moment. She was like that. The silence that followed was not empty. It was full of all the things that 28 years of grief quietly accumulates. In the spaces where a person used to be, William set the key back down on the table. He didn't push it toward her. He didn't take it back. He simply left it between them, in the space that belonged to neither of them and both of them at once. The security team is going to need a full statement, he said finally. They need to understand exactly how the access points were used. There are children involved, and regardless of intent, the protocol can't simply, "I understand," she said. "I will tell them everything." He nodded. He started to rise, then stopped. He looked at her for a long moment. "The letters," he said quietly. "Did she keep letters? Personal ones, not the official correspondence." Margaret looked at him carefully. There was a long pause, the kind that contains its own answer before any word is spoken. "Yes," she said. And with that single word, everything changed.
Diana wrote letters, 43 letters over 11 years. She wrote them in private. She gave them to Margaret to keep safe. Some were sealed. No one had ever opened them. They were written for William, for Harry, and for the grandchildren she never met. Margaret was running out of time. She was sick. She did not want to die without keeping her promise. So she came in the middle of the night with the key, and she brought the letter home to the only place they ever belonged.
William sat back down. He didn't plan to. His body simply made the decision before his mind caught up with it. The way certain words, spoken plainly in quiet rooms, pull a person back into a chair as if by gravity. "Where are they?" he asked. Margaret was careful. She looked at him the way someone looks at a door they have kept locked for a very long time, deciding whether the moment has finally come to open it. "She wrote them over several years," she said. "Not in one sitting. Not as a single document. They came in pieces, sometimes a full page, sometimes only a few lines. She would bring them to me to keep, because she didn't trust that they would survive in a place where people could find and destroy them. She paused. She was not wrong to worry about that." The implications settled into the room without needing to be expanded. William said nothing. He simply waited. They were addressed to no one in particular at first. Then, as time went on, most of them were addressed to you. Some to Harry, some to the children she didn't know she would never have the chance to meet. Her voice remained steady, but her grip on the teacup tightened slightly. She called that collection her real diary, not the one that ended up published and argued over. These were different, private, written in a way she never allowed herself to speak in public. "How many?" William asked. 43 letters. Over 11 years, it's 43. The number landed in the room like something physical. William looked at the table. His hands were still. He had the disciplined stillness of someone who had spent decades learning to manage what showed on his face. But there are some things that cannot be managed entirely. Some things reach past training and control and touch the part of a person that is simply human, simply a son. "Why didn't you come forward?" he asked. His voice was even, but not cold. "After she died? You could have. There were people, official channels, yes," Margaret said. "And those channels would have taken the letters, controlled them, edited what was released, locked the rest away, made decisions about what you were and weren't allowed to know about your own mother's thoughts. She shook her head. She gave them to me specifically because she trusted me to use judgment. And my judgment for 28 years was that you weren't ready, or that the world around you wasn't safe enough for them to matter in the right way. And now, she met his eyes. Now I'm running out of time to make a different decision. And you are no longer a boy who needs protecting from his mother's love. You are a father and a man, and you have earned the right to know who she was when no one was watching. The rain was steady against the glass. Now, somewhere upstairs, one of the children shifted in sleep, a small, brief sound that carried faintly through the palace's old walls, down the stairwell, into the space where a father sat learning something new about the woman who had shaped him most. William pressed his fingers together, then spread them flat on the table. "I need to know they're real," he said. "Not copies, not transcribed versions. The originals. They're in a box," she said. "In my home." 43 letters, in the order she wrote them. In envelopes she sealed herself. Some of them she dated. Some of them she didn't. She looked at him steadily. "I have never opened the sealed ones. Not once in 28 years. Whatever is inside those envelopes, it belongs to you." The weight of that landed somewhere deep inside him. He thought about his children asleep upstairs. He thought about what it meant to leave something behind for the people you loved to find a way, across years and silence and impossible distance. To still reach them, he thought about his mother, not as the world knew her. Not the image, the icon, the tragedy. Just her. The woman who worried whether he was sleeping enough. Who would have sat on the floor and broken every rule. Who had written 43 letters to a future she couldn't guarantee. And trusted a quiet woman in a gray cardigan to carry them to wherever they needed to go. "I want them," he said softly. "I know," she replied. "That's why I came tonight." For the first time since he had entered the room, something in William's expression shifted, not to collapse, not to break down, but to something gentler. Something that existed before princes and protocols and public duty. Something that was simply a son. Missing his mother, he looked at the key on the table between them. Then he looked at Margaret Hadley. There were still procedures to follow. Security reports to file. The palace lawyers would eventually become involved. His staff would have concerns. There would be discussions about authenticity, about privacy, about the implications of releasing any content publicly. All of that was coming, and he knew it. But in this moment, in this small room with the rain against the glass and the palace sleeping around them, none of that was what mattered. "Tell me about her," he said quietly. "Tell me something about her that no one else knows." Margaret looked at him for a long moment, and then she began to speak. Margaret talked for a long time. She told him things that had no official record. Small things, specific things, the kind of details that can't be invented, only lived. She told him that Diana had a habit of kicking off her shoes the moment she came through a private door. That she kept a worn paperback novel in her handbag that she had read at least 7 times. That she used to hum without realizing she was doing it, low and tuneless. When she was reading something that moved her, she told him that Diana used to speak to him and Perry about the future even when they were very small, not in grand speeches, but in small sideways sentences that planted something without announcing it. That she believed deeply and privately. That William would find a way to do what she had never fully managed, to be fully himself. Inside a life that demanded so much performance, William listened to all of it without speaking. When Margaret stopped, the rain had eased. The palace was beginning to lighten faintly at the edges. Not morning yet, but the first suggestion of it. The hour before dawn, when everything is blue and still. "She was proud of you," Margaret said. "Not of what you would become, of who you already were, even then." She paused. She said you understood people, that you looked at someone and actually saw them. She thought that was rare. She thought it was a gift. William looked down at the table. She would have loved Kate, she added, softer. She told me once, years before Kate existed in your life, what kind of woman she hoped you would find. Someone grounded. Someone who had her own sense of herself before she became part of yours. A pause. She got that right. He didn't speak for a long moment. When he finally did, his voice was quiet and controlled. But there was something underneath it that had not been there at the beginning of the evening. The box, he said. Can someone from my office collect it tomorrow? I don't want to involve the formal channels yet. Not until I've read them. I will have it ready, Margaret said simply. He nodded. He stood. He looked down at the key on the table, his mother's key. Worn smooth by 28 years in a woman's pocket, carried across 2 decades of loyalty and silence and grief. He picked it up, he held it for a moment, feeling the weight of it, the actual physical weight of it in his palm. It was warmer than it should have been. Warm from her pocket, warm from years of being kept close. He closed his hand around it. Thank you, he said. Just that. Nothing formal, nothing royal. Just the plain words of a person who means them. Margaret nodded once, her eyes steady and clear. Outside the meeting room, Daniel Marsh stood aside as Prince William emerged. The prince gave him a brief look, not a command, just an acknowledgement. Marsh understood without being told. Whatever had been said in that room was not for reports. Not tonight. William walked back through the quiet palace, through the gold-lit corridors and the cool marble hallways, past the portraits and the drawn curtains. Back up the stairs toward the residential floor. He moved slowly this time. He was in no hurry. He stopped once in the corridor outside the nursery. He pushed the door open, just slightly, just enough to look in. The lamp in the corner was still on. The 3 shapes beneath their blankets were still and breathing. George, Charlotte. Louis, whole and safe and dreaming in a palace that had kept them, as it always did, perfectly sealed from the world. Outside, he stood there for a long time. He was thinking about 43. Letters sitting in a box somewhere across the city. About sealed envelopes that had waited nearly 3 decades to be opened. About a woman who had hummed without knowing she was doing it. Who had kicked off her shoes inside private doors. Who had written to a future she couldn't see and trusted it to arrive. He thought about what it meant to love. Someone past your own existence. To find ways impossible, quiet, stubborn ways to still reach them. The key was still in his hand. He looked at his children one last time. Then pulled the door gently closed and walked on down the corridor. 40-3 letters. He would read them alone. The way she had written them privately. Honestly, without the weight of the world watching. He would read every word. He would let himself feel every single thing that came with them. Without managing it, without performing it. Without being a prince for even a moment. He would just be her son. And somewhere, in the part of him that had ached quietly for 28 years, something shifted, not healed, not closed, but different. Like a window opened in a room that had been sealed too long. Not grief-lifting, just love, finally finding somewhere to land.
A god trusted his feeling. An old woman kept a promise for 28 years, a key that should not have excited. And 43 letters written by a mother waiting for her son. Real love does not stop. It finds a way, always. If this story touched your heart, share it. Subscribe for more stories like this. Thank you for watching. See you in the next one.